Thank you, Thomas. It's a real privilege to be here today, and wonderful audience. Lots of amazing talks. So I've been a curious audience today, and listening a lot. So what I'm going to do is to tell you a personal story about how I've seen my relationship to city building or city making, and why I think it's important that we all become city makers instead of just makers. And I would say that Dr. Carter's talk was a perfect segue to what I'm going to present, since actually you framed it in the big picture, as Thomas just said, and I'm trying to look at it from the perspective of a neighborhood. As an urbanist architect and a technologist, having grown up in an industrial family, I've always been fascinated by how you both create places that work for people and places that look beautiful, but also how this creates meaning overall within the global supply chains that have crippled, let's say, the future of our perhaps children, or the perhaps future of our children. And so I'm going to walk through a journey. I'll go quite fast through it. And I'll end up with this idea that we're now co-developing in London called the Maker Mile, which is London's open source hardware district, and hopefully in the near future an exemplar of what a circular economy cluster could be for a city that is both bottom up and top down. The top down we still have to negotiate. We need to get the city on board to really understand what is happening on the ground. So I started from there, looking at or reading the Brundtland Report in 1990, I think I was when I read it, and then the Rio Summit in '92. I thought that my future and my generation would be about creating a relationship to the planet that was sound. And so I did different things, but overall it always had the keyword sustainability in it. And I looked at the great exemplars of that, and in the past decade we had one big statement called Masdar. How many of you actually know about Masdar here? Okay, so let's say a few, but not the majority. So this is a Norman Foster master plan for a perfect city in Abu Dhabi. And of course the sheiks can afford this, but the rest of the world can't. And the Masdar Institute is a formidable force to great corporate innovation on technology to really work for society perhaps down the line. But as a replicable model of what society and architects and urbanists should be building, I think this is doubtful. So I looked at another kind of orientation. This is more what you could say is a very futuristic interpretation. A friend at Terraform in the US, Mitch Joachim, designed this a few years ago at the MIT. It's called the Fab Tree, and it's presupposed the idea that we could grow the places we would live in instead of architecting them in a very clumsy manner by having pre-customized, industrially fabricated elements that architects sort of patch together to fit the vision of a commissioner. So this is something which, of course, is not a reality today, but it's maybe one that we will see happen, or pod living on Mars. I mean, there are many things that we're now seeing the emergence of sentient AI, and we're seeing the emergence of biotech that can maybe scale life into another planet. So with space travel, I mean, these are not far-fetched visions, but they're not realistic about now. And this is another friend, Ken Yang, who's building fantastic green skyscrapers out in Asia. And I would say that this is, again, it's more good than bad, perhaps, but it's perhaps also just less bad than good. What I mean by that is that it's an interpretation of an existing urbanistic framework that supports an ecology that is sort of plugged on to the city, versus something where the city actually has an ecosystemic intelligence that harvests sort of the logical way that nature functions. So I would not disagree with what Ken Yang is doing. I think it's formidable. At the same time, I would say it is not a model that I hope we will copy, because this is the reality of what most people will experience in many of the cities that are now growing at a galloping rate. And maybe we will see 2 billion people within 10 years living in that kind of environment. The good news is that there's lots of things that one can do to those environments to make them also thriving. they may not have the perfect urban form, but they may actually, in some cases, be more thriving than beautiful neighborhoods in West London that are perhaps, again, beautiful but stale in terms of the human creativity, because it's a parking lot for money. So the question is, for me, I had a headache. How do you scale this question of sustainability and bring in resilience for local communities, and you make something that has a circularity viral? So I think we haven't quite hit that virality. And what's beautiful about the Maker movement is that it is, in essence, viral and super accessible to everyone. So before I go into the Maker movement, I need to tell a story about where I have been spending a lot of my energies, which is participatory placemaking. So I started an organization a few years ago, about a decade, called Clear Village, as I moved away from this idea of green architecture and master planning, down to super micro planning and participatory planning, where design and architecture was an output of a community effort rather than something that was a commissioned process. And so as I did that, I realized that there were very few cases of participatory placemaking that were well documented out there. And so I embarked on writing a book, which is now available on Amazon, etc., which was selected as one of the TED books this year. So it's in the zeitgeist, if you could say. It was also in the book. You have approximately half of the participants in the official exhibition of the Venice Biennale, where I was the other week, including Alejandro Aravena's work, who is the curator of the Biennale. So this book, Recoded City, is about helping this next generation of placemakers understand the essence of participatory dynamics, how cooperative economics, how collaborative design and work can really transform the way that we shape our places. And there are a number of cases. So before I go into some of the cases, which I'll really skim through really fast, I want to salute two major people in creating what Dr. Carter mentioned a few minutes ago, which are these vibrant cities, or cities that are centered around people, the people-centric approach. On that side, you see Jane Jacobs. Who knows Jane Jacobs here? The urbanists and the architects. Okay, but if not, well, she's somebody that everybody, I think, would enjoy getting to know, because she was an urbanistic activist who was incredible in the way that she was fighting the power broker of New York, Mr. Moses, who was building a car city, essentially. And she shaped the outcomes and the discourse for many people to follow, including architect, urbanist Jan Gehl in Denmark, who I worked with in helping cycling cities for about 10 years come to life. And he has been one of the pioneers of creating new urban data sets to understand what the quality of the urban realm is. So more public space, better transportation solutions, and essentially a culturally active environment that's allowed through urban design. And also he created the data sets that would allow people to make this happen. So Jan Gehl, thank you very much, and Jane Jacobs, thank you very much, because it's so important in this age that we're in, where we're flowing in a wiki culture, where we can constantly iterate. And I apologize if I put personal jargon in there, but I like to call it wiki culture because it is about culture. It's a societal phenomenon that we can all contribute and edit to the other people's work, and that we're in a geology of participation. And this is particularly important because everything is moving so fast. On that picture is Mr. Kurzweil, or Dr. Kurzweil, apologies, who is probably one of the men with the most patents alive, also the founder of the Singularity University. And so as we move along through history right now, there's a question is not the end of the history of Francis Fukuyama in 1992, but definitely there is a perhaps 2020 scenario where we don't understand how fast history is moving. And so we need to be able to collaborate. We have huge agendas around there, and the better we do this, the more we harness technology, the better. So we are in the right environment to provide absolutely essential tools and devices to reframe the way we look at placemaking, because after all, we are a social species and we live together. So I've called this recoding, this process or the art of participatory placemaking, and I hope that makers will engage with this. So these are examples in the book that are perhaps, that I'll show in a minute, that are perhaps less oriented around technology, but they are fundamentally capable of connecting with the possibilities of technology. So my theory around recoding is that we can actually, just like in a biomimicry process, code the places that we live in so that they function for humanity, instead of having them designed and being constricting in ways that are impoverishing over time. So there is a product cycle in the city, just like the products that we design, which is very unfortunate. So instead of having a linear approach to designing cities, we want to have a circular way of designing the value chains in cities. So it's cases from all over the world. Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion projection is a way of representing that we're all part of one world. And there are cases really that talk about how we can transform places collaboratively. I won't go over them in more detail than just give you a sense, because many of them people know already. The Friends of the High Line, with the High Line project in New York, which is probably one of the most celebrated public space projects in the world, even though some people might say it has caused an accelerated gentrification, which is perhaps a perverse effect. It still is an exemplar. And Toyo Ito here with the Home for All projects after the earthquake in Sendai. This is again a way of promoting the collaboration between people to reboot a whole nation and its identity. The MIT with the Sensible City Lab, and Atelier d'Architecture Autogéré, which is a collaborative out in the south of Paris that is thinking about the way the systems work in a neighborhood. But particularly, I'll just drop this last case on WikiHouse, which is now a foundation, which looks at how you can create customizable, parametric, low-cost housing in the UK right now, but beyond the UK as we speak as well. And that is something which I think that the sort of 3D printing industry is this is not 3D printing. This is mainly CNC milling. But down the line, who says what it has to be? The important thing is that we change the way that we make houses so that it fits into the needs of people, and it changes the whole home economics agenda. So as I was doing all these things with my organization Clear Village and writing the book, I started a project because I saw a need to create an anchor in a community that was working collaboratively. So many of these collaborative projects, once a project has kind of come to fruition, the collaborative essence dissipates. And I think that if we want to build a civic economy, we need to create places where we have a point of rallying. And of course, Fab Labs do this and makerspaces do that, but perhaps we have to do it through a more cultural framework. So this is what I attempted to do. I took on an old building on the Regent's Canal and really brought it back to life through arts and culture and graffiti. And I came myself as a sort of pseudo-chef and pseudo-filmmaker looking at all the different things that I could do to stage this conversion from an old industrial building into something that had a life. I set up my own apartment as a welcoming futures salon environment so that we could have an aesthetic that would please different people, both this maker aesthetic, but also an aesthetic that people that understood the future or design, or, you know, this is a very, call it multi-affinity design approach. And then I brought an exhibition in from New York called Adhocracy that Joseph Grima curated, and I extended the curation for London to kickstart a Fab Lab in London, which is called the Machines Room. And the Machines Room is the first of its kind impact Fab Lab in the UK, and we are now part of the Fab City initiative. And our goal is really to not just look at making, but how you make making matter. And this is really the heart of it for us. And so in doing that, we started to connect with many companies that were in the area, and we're doing what we normally do in a Fab Lab. But we're seeing that there is an enormous concentration in East London, Hackney, where we're based, of hardware startups that are really creative. And some of them actually are VC funded. And so I decided to bring them into the Limewharf buildings, which is essentially a co-living, co-working hub for the hardware, the open hardware movement. And Technology Will Save Us is a very interesting company. It does educational technology. They do kits that now have been promoted by the BBC and goes into schools in the UK. They're also in the MoMA shop. Sam Labs is also in my building, which is a toy that helps kids understand coding and technology. It's effectively an IoT version of Lego that you can use also for adults. Actually, it works better for adults than kids, but they did it originally for kids. So this is another company, just to show that they have a very slick, similar approach to how they present themselves. These are very solid companies that have a growth potential that's global, and they're in this area where we are. So OpenDesk is also a company that we brought in. They make furniture that you can fabricate locally. So instead of having furniture miles attached to your furniture, you can buy a piece of furniture from your phone, and then you download the design, and you're matched with a local fabricator. So the machines room is a fabrication environment for OpenDesk. So we can make the furniture, and if you buy that furniture, and instead of going to a shop, you go into a makerspace or a fabrication studio that actually creates the furniture, and if you want, you could customize it. So it's a very interesting business model. You could call it the future of IKEA. I know IKEA is around, so we'll see if that works out. But they are one of those companies that does that. So basically this idea of the long tail, I see it happening in products and services, but also in city making. So I decided to, with a bunch of people in the area, see if we couldn't make more out of all these startups that were in my space, but also in other co-working spaces. And this is what is known as the Maker Mile. So the Maker Mile, we started as a London Design Festival trail, and we welcome people to an open mile event, which with a map that was nicely designed, we explained that there was something happening out there. And this is now a website. It's a community organized website, which from the machines room, we help sort of make sure that people come for gatherings. And the machines room is the common infrastructure for the Maker Mile. These are just images from the website. So you get a sense of this idea of this is 1 square mile of maker culture, and this is the first of its kind in the world, where it's a completely open source effort. And the machines room is on that map, and all these are the different maker-related companies within Viner Street, which is a street that I have effectively brought back to life. So the example of Dr. Carter earlier of the post-industrial city, this is the example at a street scale level, at a neighborhood scale level, where we've brought all these businesses together that create synergies, and they're a collaborative economy that is really shaping up nicely. More than 1,000 jobs now in the Maker Mile, and perhaps, it will double in a year. The companies that I've brought into my spaces and helped incubate have moved from roughly 20 people to over 100 in the span of 3 years. So this is a fast-growing economy, not faster than necessarily than Moore's Law, but there is a form of exponentiality indirectly attached to the companies that are there. And so it's all these different companies that are there. I mean, now probably up to 100 in the Maker Mile will soon be there. And there are companies like Roly, which is just on the edge of the Maker Mile, who make the future of the keyboard. Very interesting, highly revered international company. Or Kano, a company that does a number of a very interesting new computer for all ages. You can self-build a computer. It was also covered by Wired, CNN, Forbes, and Bear Conductive, making electric paint, which is also in the Maker Mile. And WikiHouse I mentioned. So all these are examples of companies in Sugru. Many of you know Sugru probably, also in the Maker Mile. So the Limewharf, which is this place that I rebooted and redesigned, acts as this center or an anchor for this area. And the machines room is this town hall, if you want, for every one of these events that are helping the maker community gather around this and rethink the way that it can function as a city-making organism that is multifaceted, full of talent, and diverse in the way it operates. So the Maker Mile here, we are going to make it into a design trail during the London Design Festival this year. So if you're in London in September, that will be great to see you. And really, the question here I want to pose is, where and what particularly does a Fab City Hall look like? So I've decided to convert my building and design the extension for the Lime Wharf into this Fab City Hall, which is going to be a design that I did with Carmody Groark. So we co-signed this design, which we're expecting planning in a few days for. And we'll raise this money to make the first maker icon in Europe, a place dedicated to the people of our generation who think that this is a way of doing city making. And I won't go through the designs of the details because I don't think that's the most important here today. Of course, it'll include a number of new technologies related to making and biomimicry and advanced architecture. But overall, beyond makers, I think we all need to become city makers. And on that, I will leave you.